Volume.
Previously on Too Many Enemies.
In South Africa, there are a very diverse range of motivations behind the assassinations. And there's also a very large, for want of a better word, assassination industry. So there are a lot of hitmen for hire, quite literally.
He came back with two guns, actually. The one was an AK and the other one was a handgun. Hoodler said that he got, they handed him the AK, and then they followed the car, Bozwana and them, to Pretoria.
But these guys move in, shoot, and move out. It's a mafia.
And you're ultimately collecting money from people and using that money to hire killers to kill the same people.
That's exactly.
It is the 2nd of May 2015, and we are at one of the most important boxing matches of all time.
It's time. Two legends. One destiny. All roads end here. Mayweather Pacquiao.
At the time, this was dubbed the fight of the century, or the battle for greatness. It was Floyd Mayweather versus Manny Pacquiao. The reason why we are here for this story is actually because a particularly important South African is right here in the audience. South African Minister of Sports and Recreation at the time, Fikile Mbalula, is part of the audience. He went on to become the Minister of Police and is currently in 2021 the Minister of Transport. He's a Mayweather fan, having hosted him in South Africa the year previously. But how Fikile managed to allegedly fund his travel to get to Las Vegas to see this fight is more exciting than the fight itself. How did he get the funds? Well, of course, it allegedly involves the assassinated billionaire R1-million Bozwana. Welcome. This is Too Many Enemies. I'm Paul McNally. This is the final episode. In these 6 episodes, we have been looking at the assassination of billionaire R1-million Bozwana and what his murder means for the state of politics, crime, and justice in South Africa today. We pick up the story in South African Parliament in 2017, when Fikile was then the Minister of Police.
Point of order, Chairperson.
This is a video taken off of YouTube, which shows Parliament in session and laughter is beginning to break out.
Is it parliamentary for the Minister of Police to have earphones in his ears listening?
Fikile is in the front row, white headphones firmly in his ears. He's smiling wildly with his mouth wide open.
Continue, Honourable Member. Honourable Minister, please. Okay, take your seat.
The whole of Parliament is now in hysterics, and Fikile still hasn't removed his headphones. Looks like he's enjoying the attention, laughing along with everyone else.
Continue.
House Chairperson.
Honourable Steenhuisen.
Steenhuisen, speaking here, is the leader of the opposition.
You may have ruled it's parliamentary to have his earphones in, but I wonder if he could explain to us whether he's listening to Beyonce or Casey and Jojo.
Thank you for your sense of humour. Continue, Honourable Member.
I bring this video up to show that Fikile is this larger-than-life figure in South African politics.
He styles himself Mr. Fearful, meaning that he fears nothing.
This is Makuda Safara. He's now the deputy editor of the Sunday Times, and he was the editor of the Sunday World, which is a newspaper that closely covers the Bozwana case, particularly the connections with Fikile. Can I ask you just to put that on that?
Right?
Just on your lapel. I ask him, kind of meekly, to put on a lapel mic.
Did you spray it?
No, I don't have any spray. Despite me not having any sanitizer spray, Makuda graciously clips the mic to his chest and continues with his explanation of Fikile.
How he speaks creates an impression of somebody who's fearless, and how he dresses is also something of interest.
If you Google Fikile Mbulula clothes, you'll get pictures of him smoking a pipe, wearing gold chains, and sporting some outrageously shaped prescription glasses.
He just wear your Nigerian garbs, head to toe. His style is eclectic. He's unpredictable.
But despite these eccentricities, Fikile is also a serious career politician.
He was, at a point, the president of the ANC Youth League, and people who lead the Youth League often are expected to rise in terms of their standing in the ANC, and that, of course, is linked to their standing in government as a cabinet minister.
As I said, he's occupied a number of posts.
From the police, sports, to the Department of Transport, where he's at now.
At this point, let's go back to that boxing match from the start of this episode. It has been reported that Fikile had financial ties to Bozwana, as in he borrowed massive sums of money from him. And one of these loans, because they were loans, was for R1 million, about $65,000. So Fikile could allegedly come to this boxing match to see his hero Mayweather fight and ultimately, spoiler from 2015, win. We don't know for sure, but the payment was made in 2015, shortly before Fikile and Thabo embarked on a controversial trip to Las Vegas to attend a boxing match. There was R1 million that was loaned to Fikile from Bozwana. Can you explain a little bit about that and how that kind of came about?
Fikile and a TV and radio personality called GI-TOC going to the US to meet with Floyd Mayweather. That was then done according to the records we had at the time. The information was that there were issues about the repayment of the money, and that led to the two of them having some online exchanges of sorts. I think, whether it's SMSs or WhatsApps, I can't recall at this point. The thing was then that the police became interested in the communication between the two, because in their view, it happened in the period leading to Bozwana's killing.
So they became interested after he was dead?
Yes.
Yeah. Our extravagant boxing match was in May 2015, and Bozwana was assassinated in October of that same year. It was reported by News 24 that they had obtained court papers in which it is alleged that Bozwana had earlier instructed a Bloemfontein law firm to pay Thabo Molefe, also known as DJ Thibaut Touch, an amount of R1 million. Now, this money was earmarked for Fikile. They just used Thabo's bank account, according to the court papers. Thibaut Touch, just for people who don't know, how would you describe him? How would you describe him as an entity?
Thibaut Touch is a former DJ on the country's most popular commercial radio station. He hosted an afternoon drive show.
Now, Fikile said at Bozwana's funeral, among other things, he was a generous man. Now, he's saying this about Bozwana. He was one person I could abuse financially and sometimes for political reasons. He said this at his funeral.
The police wanted to understand his interactions with Bozwana. So in other words, they did an application to court so that they are able to access his movements, access his telecommunication exchanges with Bozwana and make an assessment on the basis of what they find, how to proceed with their investigation.
We contacted Fikile to respond to this podcast and his connections with Bozwana, but communicating through his spokespeople, he refused. He said he wasn't able to comment on any of this. And though we don't have a response from him about Bozwana, so you can get a sense of the kind of guy we are dealing with, here is how he responded when asked at a press conference if he was involved in state capture and the infamous Gupta family.
And the fact of the matter is that I owe nobody any explanation. It is the onus is on those who make such allegations to prove them. I'm not going to join the chorus which I don't know who is the conductor. I am in charge of my own destination. And I don't just dance to music that I've never composed. I compose my own sound. So for those who have composed the Gupta's chorus, let them sing for it. I'm Fikile Mbalula, Minister of the ANC, appointed by Jacob Zuma, seconded by African National Congress. I'm here to address issues that relate to FIFA, and not that I'm avoiding that question, but for now, that is the issue at hand. I'm moving and I'm going ahead. I never feel that my reputation is at stake at any given point in time.
Fikile's spokesperson accused News 24, when they reported on all of this, of, quote, making a lot of unfounded speculations, end quote. According to her, News 24 was, quote, trying to draw a narrative that the minister was the beneficiary of the late Mr. Bozwana's businesses and that a loan was given to them for some trip to Las Vegas, end quote. Such claims are, quote, incorrect and absolute hogwash, end quote. Here is Makuda again, commenting on how the Sunday World, when he worked there, approached Fikile about the accusations.
We did phone him about the claims and the information that we had, and the police had indicated that they wanted to have a conversation with him. And he indicated that they had already had a conversation with him, and he answered all their questions, and you know, he doesn't understand why months later we are asking him questions about that.
But Fikile denies the loans completely, right? He just said that there was no money exchanged.
Yeah, but there was a thing about SMSs.
Umpu Baloy, you'll remember her as the woman who was in the car when Bozwana was assassinated, was shot herself and drove them both to hospital. Here she enters the story again.
The ex-girlfriend of Bozwana did mention something about Bozwana being upset and having sent Fikile a number of SMSs, which is the thing that got police to be interested in Fikile's cell phone communication.
So the police started tracking Fikile's movements. And I gotta say, where he'd been going and who he'd been meeting was astounding. Here we are, and I'm arriving at Emperor's Palace. It's just outside by the airport. It's a huge casino complex with restaurants, hotels, and we're walking past a huge emperor statue with a fake painted on blue sky with clouds. This is Emperor's Palace. The reason I'm at Emperor's Palace is to scope out where Fikile had a very important meeting with Bozwana 2 days before he was killed. Here's Makuda again.
Yeah, in the period leading to the killing of Bozwana, yeah, there was a meeting.
But there was a third person at this meeting with Fikile and Bozwana at Emperor's Palace. As I walk around, I imagine all three of them meeting in one of the conference rooms that peel off from the main casino floor. The third person at the meeting was, and I still can't believe it, Vusi Keke Matabela, one of the co-accused on trial for Bozwana's murder.
But the police discovered that this Vusi Keke is implicated in the murder of Bozwana, but that the minister, Fikile, has had communication with this person who is implicated in the murder. And so it became a thing that required further investigation.
The cops wanted to know if it was a coincidence that Fikile had money troubles with Bozwana.
And then Bozwana dies. And that Fikile is in communication with one of the people who's alleged to have had a role in the killing of Bozwana. The coincidences required, I imagine, to the police further investigation.
Now, Fikile's lawyers have made it clear that while he was questioned by the police, he was never a suspect in the murder. But the question remains, why would a senior minister be at a meeting in a casino with a billionaire and the person who would later be put on trial for his murder? Fikile's explanation is as follows.
Fikile did explain that there was a friendship between them, but he didn't want to go into detail, so, it just left too many questions unanswered. Bozwana was his friend, and Keke is his friend.
Fikile is friends with both these men.
Yeah. And so if the three of them are meeting, why must we read anything into that?
As far as we can tell, Bozwana hadn't been paid the $1 million back at the time of his death. Umpu Baloy said in an extended statement that the meeting at Emperor's Palace did happen and that she saw Vusi Keke at that meeting. And it did come out in court that Fikile called Vusi on the day of the murder. But of course, the contents of those calls is not known. And then this idea that Fikile was going to turn KK in when he got the warrant of arrest, is there something in that? And he never did that. Do you think that that's that's kind of a curious thing to be like, if they were friends, that he was going to claim that he was going to turn him in? What do you make of that?
Fikile at the time was the Minister of Police. So it means, he had some kind of influence in operations or something. And the police were struggling to get hold or to find this Keke. And there was a thing but Keke and the minister have some kind of relation. So if they are struggling, are they really struggling, or are they not just getting through to him because he has a relationship with the minister? And I suspect, and this is my own interpretation, that Fikile, looking at that and knowing that he has access to this fugitive, then said, listen, Mr. Officer, I'll get you this guy. And that never happened. I mean, you can interpret that in many different ways. Whether he said that and that has had an effect of demobilizing the police who are looking for his friend, because the police said and hoped that their boss will bring this guy in.
Vusi Keke eventually did turn himself in. The conversation with Makuda turns to a few moments of reflection concerning how serious all of this is.
It would be concerning if many of those things are true. And it would be worrying if a minister sitting in cabinet has relationships with hired killers. And it's important to get to the bottom of the matter so that if Fikile is not involved in any of those things, and that the connections between him and Vusi and other people are just coincidences, then he must be cleared, and the police must indicate that the minister is not involved in any way. And if he is, and if they prove that he had any role, or that the monies owed between the parties influenced anything that had to do with Bozwana's killings, then there must be consequences for his actions.
Time for a quick update. Vusi Keke and his co-accused returned to court in November 2020. Zelda Fenter, who we spoke to in a previous episode, is there reporting on the matter. They are still going through the cell phone records between the co-accused, just like when I visited court in a previous episode, and something is revealed that is a huge blow to the state's case. Warrant Officer Fenter testifies that the co-accused did not communicate via cell phone on the day of the killing. This is despite Sipho Hudla's confession to the contrary. He said in his statement that Vusi phoned him on the day and said, quote, "We must still carry out the job," end quote. Though, like we've said before, Hudla has claimed that his confession is untrue and that the police forced it out of him. I went back to private investigator Mike Bolhuis, who we met in the first episode, to get his opinion on if Vusi KK will be convicted.
The chances of him getting out is, I don't think it's easy.
Really?
I don't think it's easy. And the chances of more cases being added against him is very good. And the chances of him being found guilty is great.
Okay.
Because all of us working on this case together is a very effective, non-corrupt group.
And you're confident with the police that you're working with that they're not corrupt?
Yeah, we wish we can work with every single case like that, but unfortunately you just can't. But in this case, I'm extremely confident.
And on top of that, the political side of the case involving top ANC politicians, will we ever see an arrest? The accusations and the evidence have simply been left hanging in the air. For some final reflections on assassinations in Africa, I visit Jenny Irish Korboshin, a researcher for the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime, at her house in Johannesburg. Well, let's talk about South Africa first. Do you think it's at a critical phase?
It's becoming a greater and greater problem. I don't want to say it's not fixable, because what does that say? But I think that unless we start looking quite seriously at a whole lot of things that link into the assassinations, obviously the work that people like the Zondo Commission, etc., are doing plays an important role, but also looking at different areas where it's happening. So the taxi sectors, and start having a serious review of what's going on there, and also looking at things like the gangs, but also looking at the availability of firearms, the criminal justice system, corruption within the criminal justice system. Then I think it's going to become more and more difficult for us to deal with it. But I don't want to say we're not going to be able to deal with it. The nature of violence in those areas is beginning to change, and we've seen quite targeted assassinations. So if you take the taxi industry, for example, over the last couple of years, we've seen an increase in the number of assassinations, targeted assassinations.
So what about the broader work in terms of you've done with Mozambique and Zimbabwe? How is that different from South Africa, and how is it similar?
A lot of it is very politically motivated. What you're seeing in Zimbabwe is a link between the assassinations and some of the abductions, the people that are involved in the abductions, torture of community activists, etc., are also involved in some of the assassinations. Some people don't survive those abductions and torture. Other people are released, and it's used more as an intimidatory. But what we're seeing is it's very similar people that are involved in those. And they are incredibly heavily armed.
And for people who don't know about the abductions in Zimbabwe, if it's people in Europe, or can you explain a little bit about that?
Okay, so you have people arriving at homes, at people's houses, and abducting them at their houses, from their homes, and taking them from their homes. Heavily armed groups of people, often carrying assault rifles and very heavy firepower, which in the Zimbabwean context is quite difficult. It's not as easy to access, for example, as it is in South Africa and Mozambique. And very often those people are people that would be speaking out on particular issues, social issues or political issues within the country, maybe broadly described as human rights activists. And in some instances, those activists would be taken and held and tortured, and in other instances, they wouldn't survive the abduction. And it's not just a random thing, it's people that are being targeted, often abducted from their homes or places, or places of work, etc. And there have been allegations that those people have got, the people doing the abductions and the assassinations have got quite close ties with people within the security services.
Jenny then moves on to the assassination crisis in Mozambique that we looked at in a previous episode.
In Mozambique, I think it follows a slightly more like South Africa trajectory. So you do have some political stuff taking place, but you also have some stuff which is related to corruption and general crime, people involved in investigating that. I think in all three cases, what we're finding is that the people involved in these assassinations are quite heavily armed, and that we're not seeing a tremendous amount of them being arrested and prosecuted. It's an odd case rather than the general rule.
So to me, it feels like it's the several different facets that you need to attack to kind of solve the assassination problem. It's not like, even if you put a lot of energy into it, you can't hit it directly. It's kind of something that's systematic in lots of different ways.
Yeah, I mean, even if you take out some of the people involved in the assassinations, unless you deal with the people that have ordered the assassinations, the people that have been behind the assassinations. I mean, the most recent case would obviously be of Kinnear's assassination in the Western Cape.
Charles Kinnear was a police officer who was allegedly investigating a gun syndicate within the police. Allegedly, his investigation was a threat to the criminal underworld and a corrupt police network. He was assassinated in September 2020. Jenny says to solve a case like that, you need to look at numerous factors that surround the assassination, not just the hitman.
There's a lot that goes on that is behind that assassination that needs to be dealt with, and I think that's what we need to be looking at, not just getting to the bottom of who carried out the assassinations, which is important, but also looking at in what context are people being assassinated, and what is happening about that context with regard to the criminal justice system.
I asked Jenny who within the criminal justice system is actually working on this problem.
I think there are people within the criminal justice system, and those people themselves become targets, as happened with Kinnear himself. And the South African criminal justice system has a better record of kind of catching people for their involvement in this than, say, the Zimbabwe and Mozambique. So I'm just using South Africa as an example. A lot of the focus seems to be on arrest of the person that carried out the assassination within the criminal justice, and we'll get to the bottom of this, but getting to the bottom of it often means being able to report your success in terms of arrests. And I think we need to look at it beyond looking at the whole networks that are involved in commissioning these assassinations.
There is also a worst case scenario which we could be facing.
What I find very concerning, people involved in the criminal justice system and police officers and that are no longer safe from assassinations, then we're heading down a very dangerous path, because people are going to be scared to undertake certain investigations because of the consequences. And then we could land up with a situation like you have in some Latin American countries.
We end this series at Bozwana's grave. He was buried at Mooikloof Heights Cemetery in Pretoria, but, according to the Sunday World, there's been a raging family fight to have his body exhumed and moved. There is a demand to have him buried next to his father and other family members in a cemetery in Kuruman. That's over 500 kilometers away in the Northern Cape. It's Bozwana's widow who is against the exhumation. Benedict, Bozwana's brother, told the Sunday World, "The way he is buried in Pretoria, it's like he's lost and without family. We have our own cemetery, and according to culture, he must be buried there with his father and other family members." And this ongoing feud around Bozwana's resting place seems to epitomize his entire case. The push and pull of all these players, some of them incredibly high profile, and yet little resolution for an assassination that was so public and so violent. You've been listening to Too Many Enemies. This podcast series has been produced by me, Paul McNally, and podcasting company Volume. It's brought to you by the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime in partnership with News 24. You can find out more about the Global Initiative by visiting globalinitiative.net. That's globalinitiative.net. We would also like to acknowledge Supersport, the author of the advertisement heard in this episode. The advert was originally posted on YouTube on the 24th of April, 2015. The The music for this series was composed by Oman Mori. This episode was mixed and mastered by Gwynch Sarame and Richard Rumney. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.
Volume.